Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our On Humor and Other Strategies for Survival Zoom panel discussion in recognition of the exhibition Cumulus, which is Pace Gallery's first solo exhibition with Nina Katchadourian in Chelsea at 540 West 25th Gallery, which is open from now through June 26th. I am Mark Beasley, the curatorial director of Pace Live, and today we're gathered to consider humor, that often misunderstood, sometimes libelous, more likely than not liberatory form that relieves, redresses, remedies all known ills, well, almost all. And so to our panel, and many thanks to Nina for the introduction to the first of our panelists, writer, Professor Glenda R. Carpio. Glenda is Professor of African and African-American Studies and English at Harvard University. She's the author of Laughing Fit to Kill, this incredible book subtitled Black Humor in the Fictions of Slavery from 2008, and the editor of the Cambridge Companion to Richard Wright. She is now finishing a book titled Migrant Aesthetics, a Study of Contemporary Immigrant Literature. And to our artist, Nina Katchadourian. Nina is an interdisciplinary artist whose work includes video, performance, sound, sculpture, photography, and public projects. Katchadourian has received grants and awards from the New York Foundation for the Arts, the Tiffany Foundation, and the Nancy Graves Foundation. Nina is an associate professor at the New York University Gallatin School of Individualized Study. And finally, and not least, to Reggie. Reggie Watts is known to many of us, an internationally renowned musician, comedian, writer, actor, who currently stars as a band leader on CBS's The Late Late Show with James Corden. Using his formidable voice, looping pedals, and his vast imagination, Watts blends and blurs the lines between music and comedy, wowing audiences with performances that are 100% improvised. Reggie was born in Germany, raised in Montana, and currently resides in Los Angeles. Welcome all, welcome everyone. I was going to give a quick introduction to the work of Nina and the specific exhibition we're here to in part discuss, or is the kind of foundation for our discussion, Cumulus. This is work from 2005. Essentially, it's Nina's take or fictionalized or constructed genealogy of those brands in a supermarket that have a kind of key figure, often involving typologies, the Italian that's more Italian than the tomato, or, you know, the kind of bald, heavy, masculine guy that is the most incredible kitchen cleaner. The genealogy of the supermarket is revised whenever it's shown. This is its first iteration in New York since 2005, and a number of new relatives are added each time. So here we have it. It's laid on William Morris flock wallpaper, and we have these very interesting frames for each family member. This is a key work, accent elimination, and it engages with parental accents, I guess. So here we have Nina in the center of the installation. There are 6 monitors. To the left is Nina's father. To the right is Nina's mother, both Armenian parents, but it's a little more complicated than that. Her mother's Finnish in descent. And actually what we're looking at is Nina and the family in consultation with a dialect coach, them kind of responding to or adopting or adapting the parental accent. So Nina's attempting to speak with the accents of her parents, and her parents are attempting to speak with her accent. And to the next one, which is Paranormal Postcards. Nina has been collecting these postcards since a layover at the Oslo airport in 1997. It's a mapped, it has this very structured, very formal kind of chart system that then belies this very odd, very surreal number of oblique associations from musicians to presidents to Queen Elizabeth. And in a way, she's drawn this kind of mental mapping, this almost kind of psychotic suggestion of connections between different images, different architectures, different people. And each time this is kind of built upon as she travels from city to city, airport to airport. And obviously Paranormal Postcards, in our time of lockdown and the lack of travel, it has this other kind of weight, this imagined connection between points on the planet and individuals and architecture. The Whisker print series, my particular favorite of the works on display in Cumulus, and there's 17 whiskers from Nina's cats over time, collected you know, in and around the house, and then placed on a print, a kind of inked bed, to create these other animals, these kind of fictive deep sea creatures. And then the whiskers are taken, cleaned off, and then committed again to the print. And here we have these kind of odd jellyfish, these kind of weird beasts from the kind of literal material of the domestic cat. And what I guess the thing perhaps yesterday, Nina, we didn't get to per se or directly was this idea of humor. When we were thinking about the panel, it wouldn't be correct to say that humor is everything in your work. It's certainly not. You know, humor is this thing that's kind of thrown up and as a way to catch the individual and the individual's imagination, but then to ground it in something much more serious and much more direct, much as Glenda talks about, and much as you know, Reggie inhabits these many characters. And Nina, it strikes me that unpicking identity and unpacking typologies through the adoption of these formal codes, the chart, the genealogy, is a kind of comedic foil, or the straight man, can we say, straight person / folk now, I don't know what the new term is, that then allows you to insert this other narrative that disrupts information. I'm looking for a question in that, and it's very.
Well, I can tell you how I often explain this as a strategy. I mean, I think I get the question about humor more than any other question. I'd say at the end of an artist talk, can you address the use of humor in your work? And it's like, I always say, I don't think I intentionally set out to make things that are funny. That's not sort of the point, but I'm attracted to things in the world that are awkward, that are odd, that are sort of incongruous. That I feel like deserve a second look, because maybe beyond just the oddness, superficially, there might be something quite meaningful to think about. And so using humor as a strategy for me has always been a way of, I hope in a kind of warm and welcoming way, saying, come on in. And then once I have the person sort of in, I can slam the door behind them and actually say, now there's something I want to talk to you about, or now there's more to do, and now there's more to think about. And I think for me, the most rich kinds of humor really are the ones that work that way, where there's sort of, you've sort of been seduced in, but then you're like, oh my God, now actually there's something quite sort of, it could be serious, it could be puzzling, it could be a kind of experience where you're suddenly really not sure what you believe anymore. I like those kinds of disorientations a lot. So I really believe in humor as a tool. And as I say, sometimes we can think of lots of historical examples where humor was the only way to address the most serious stuff imaginable, and it costs people's lives, their lives sometimes. So, you know, funny and frivolous are not the same thing. That is something I've said a lot of times. I really believe that.
Nothing as serious as humor, you know, in some level. It's an interesting thing, and I love the way that it's used as some kind of Trojan horse almost.
Totally.
These other ideas, and in that sense, I'm turning now to Glenda, and in the book Laughing Fit to Kill, and I've been reading it over these last few weeks, you take a number of examples. The ones that spoke to me were Richard Pryor and Chappelle, and then also the work of Cara Walker. And you, throughout the book, you describe humor as in triplicate, as relief, redress, and then often remedy to a history or a history of repression. In my experience, the academy or the academic world is often wary or suspicious of humor as maybe an inexact science. And I just wondered what compelled you to address the subject, and specifically Black humor in the fictions of slavery. You know, it's a very loaded, very powerful form that is used with this, you know, incredibly exacting kind of almost scalpel splicing structural society. And yeah, I just wondered what brought you to that, and maybe as a secondary question, what you see within Nina's work that also speaks to that, perhaps.
Well, I'll start actually backwards and think about Nina's work. It strikes me that one of the definitions of art, basic definition, is play. You play with form, right? And so that I think that part of what I see in her work is this invitation to experience art as play, and that she experiences it as she makes it, right? And often what comes out of that play is a perspective that you wouldn't otherwise have, a calling into question of the very terms we use to explain anything. Like, this is why the modernists, I think, are modernist literary artists are often very funny people. Think of Beckett, right? But not funny as in like a guffawing belly laugh, although sometimes there's that too, So I think what originally attracted me to the study of humor, there are many things, but one of them is that academics studying art often tend to be so serious about something that's very visceral, and that often I think it's about play, not only about ideas and philosophy. All those things come as you play with form, and so that's one way in which that one of the reasons that attracted me to the study. But in terms of addressing something like, genocide, slavery, you would think, why would you think about humor in connection to something like that, right? But I think laughter can be a kind of mourning, right? So it is a hook, like we've been saying, but it's also a way to mourn, right? And the playwright Susan Laurie Parks often reminds us that when you laugh really hard, you cry too, and you feel a kind of cathartic release that isn't necessarily all joy, right? And so I think about, in the book, I was really trying to explore that side of humor. And another side too is to pillory ideologies that are so bizarre, right? To call into question one's humanity and to be the person whose humanity is being called into question. One of the basic responses is absurdity, right? And so, the core of slavery was to call into question the humanity of millions of people, and so in some ways, if you pause to think that way, it isn't so surprising that when you go to, genocide, you find humor, especially if you have the collective, right? I think if it's happening to a single person, you might see madness, right? But if it's happening collectively, then you have the sense of like, all of us are experiencing this absurdity. And so, you see, for instance, a collective is seeing how their humanity is being degraded. So one response, say it's being degraded sometimes in the history of the US, for instance, is degraded through, say, minstrelsy. So what you see is it's humor being deployed in to negative ends, towards hatred, right? And so then you see people laughing at the laugh, right? And so you begin to see this play with form in which people see the attack on oneself, right? Caricatures of Black humanity, right? And so someone like Kara Walker, for instance, does a lot with laughing at the laugh, right? And Susan Laurie Parks does that too, right? So, these are some of the reasons. I can say more later, but the other very basic reason was also that humor is a really large category of inquiry, and so I thought one of the ways to understand it is to give it a subject that you wouldn't necessarily think about, which is slavery, right? And so instead of doing like an encyclopedia of Black humor, right? Which, you know, you have Mel Watkins on the Real, right? That's what it's called. It's a beautiful encyclopedia of Black humor, right? But I didn't want to be encyclopedic. I wanted to explore the idea, you know, and the formal strategies by which people, you know, think through form to give life to humor, right?
Reggie, what drew you to humor? I think there's a big question.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know. I guess I've always loved laughing, like since I was a kid. So I was pretty much, you know, some kind of a performer slash clown all of my life, you know. So that came pretty naturally to me, and I kind of just sought out opportunities to, you know, be funny in a school play, or you know, or be funny on the playground and do impersonations of pop singers, you know, to my friends on the playground, you know, or doing speech and debate, you know, and doing extemporaneous stuff. And but it was it's weird. It's like I don't really feel like it just feels like I've always been this, you know, and it's definitely evolved over time. But I think the humor, I think for me when I was a kid and I saw things like, you know, like you mentioned, like Richard Pryor or Monty Python, or you know, well, any British humor really. That's really where the dry sense of humor I latched onto immediately. But then like just some of the, you know, like Gene Wilder and well, Bill Cosby, Eddie Murphy, you know, these types of people, Saturday Night Live in the 80s, like, and then the Muppet Show, like silly, really silly things. And so I'd always laughed my ass off so much, and then I would like take those and absorb those and then kind of reflect them later, or do, you know, impressions of what I just heard. So yeah, I guess I was drawn to humor just because it seemed so natural, you know, to me. Yeah.
I remember, Reggie, when we were doing the Comedy Club, a close friend of mine who became a friend of yours, I think, over a couple of days, this Welsh performance artist, Bedwyr Williams. And you know, in that green room space before a set, or when you performed in Miami, there was this incredible ability you had within the space of 8 hours to mimic or to adopt not just the accent, but the moves and vibe of Bedwyr. And that seems such a kind of key skill, and not to be some like dime store psychologist, which I'm about to be. But I know in terms of your, you know, born in Germany, your father was in the military. I believe you'd moved around, and you had this, and then also in terms of form, from music to stand up, what, you know, that ability, that chameleon-like kind of sensibility, it seemed very, yeah, is natural the word? Like it seemed you just had that, and it was, you know, I'd seen versions of it, but not to the extent that you had it. And I wondered, in that subtitle of today's, you know, what is humor good for, would you say? And this is to all, but to Reggie, to Reggie.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to me, it's like humor is important because it's essentially a quick access to enlightenment. You know, it's you know, humor to me is what it does is it induces a paradoxical state where you know, you set up an expectation and you subvert the expectation in some way, and the subversion of the expectation creates a momentary just a moment of enlightenment for an audience member. So especially if it's set up right. And so when people really lose their shit or they're laughing, there's like this kind of collision of two things, and then they become kind of everything, nothing. And I think that's where the humor comes from. I think it's not necessarily like, oh, that, you know, that guy fell down, that was funny. It's more just like the way that it collides, these two ideas kind of collide. It's like a super collider, just like boom, it's like everything nothing, and you're just like, ah, ha, 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 ha. You know, so I think it's a way of creating perspective, zooming out very quickly, and feeling that split second of enlightenment. That's just the only response is to laugh.
I might tag something onto that, because it's really interesting to hear you use those descriptions, because they're a little bit similar to something I say when I talk about confusion. And a lot of the things I make, many of the things I make, have originated from sort of a moment of profound misunderstanding of something, like having gotten something completely wrong. And I mean, just to give the briefest of anecdotal examples, I was on a residency years ago on the island of Trinidad, and I ended up in a very remote part of the forest one day and heard a bird that I thought was a car alarm, which was like completely like wrong thing to think. But I loved the mistake. And for a second, the kind of that sound, which kind of was nothing and yet familiar, and I couldn't place it, the sort of, as you said, and I've often said the same phrase, all the pieces were kind of up in the air. And for a second, anything was possible, like anything could have been possible. So I've thought a lot about confusion, and also maybe humor, latching it onto what you just said, as the space of sort of tremendous, freed up, reckless thinking, like this sort of, before it all makes sense again, there's a moment where like all things are possible. And I feel like that is a sort of emancipatory almost state of mind, like to sort of be able to imagine something that isn't what you usually live is a huge kind of experience, I think. So I find that I find a lot of optimism in those things that work that way.
Yeah. But confusion is very much related. I mean, like, as you say, that, you know, for me, like also in my shows, I love to create that disorientation, because it's a destabilization of like, well, in a way it kind of runs someone down. It's like their rational mind is trying to grab onto, oh, I know what this person's doing, or I know what this situation is, oh, I know what it is. And then when you keep removing it, it tires people out until they just give up, and then they're just kind of in an experiential mode.
Yeah.
Well, you allow for an experience of entropy, right? Which is, if you say, would you like to experience some entropy? Probably people would say no, you know, like, you're crazy, right? But when you do it in a way that, as you know, with Nina's work, it's not like you enter the gallery, you're like, well, I'll meet you at Nina's show so we can experience entropy. But then you get there and you experience it. And so, you know, and you don't know that how it's going to be, you know, so it lets us briefly understand that language and any other ways of communicating and being human with each other, we build up these systems, but they are, you know, they could be replaced by something else, you know. It could have been a car alarm, you know, and for a split second, it could have been that, right? So I think that's part of the joy of like releasing from the systems that we have to make sense, right?
I've often said that, you know, I mean, here's the genealogy piece behind me, but the big postcard piece, which is sort of taking up like the biggest amount of space in this room right now, they're both things that I hope someone walks into this room and they think they are in the presence of something true, like something with an authorial voice that totally convinces them they're about to be told a bunch of facts or something kind of researched. And I love taking known forms and then filling them with another kind of content. I mean, I think, Reggie, I feel some kinship to your work in this way. I mean, I think one reason I mentioned the TED Talk yesterday to Mark is that there's something where I think you often do this, where you take the form of something, gut it of the content, the usual content, and then we sort of have this weird shell of the form, where the form is kind of the thing we're looking at and which holds a lot of meaning, actually. What are these TED Talk modes that are so pervasive to that way that people perform them, and yet you kind of, by separating those two things from one another, it's possible to sort of have them show something back. I don't know. I love that strategy, and I think you do that so great in such a great way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, thanks. I mean, it's exactly like what you're doing, like, you know, with the postcard thing and everything. It's like I totally, you know, as soon as you were describing that, or that was being described, I was like, oh yeah, I see. It's like, you know, it's like an alternate reality, you know. It's just like, it's, you know, taking that form and showing the possibility of another way of seeing the world, because we get, again, our rational mind just wants to like know stuff and rely on it. And and the best thing that art can do and what humor can do is to destabilize that idea, and to like put us in a state where we're like, huh? Like more like when you're a child, the childlike state where you're like, oh, is that true? It's like, oh, I don't know, is that true? And then only as we get older do we kind of like narrow our perception of what reality is, because it feels more functional, because we have to like pay our taxes and do it, whatever. And so it's a moment of freedom, especially when we're fooled, fooled, quote unquote.
Can I ask both Glenda and Reggie? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say very quickly, like just like the image that you have behind you, like the way that a genealogy looks on the wall, it's like all about like order, and even the postcards, you kind of set them out, like to have this narrative of like you read them from right to left, and so sorry, left to right, and then you get closer, and all of what you see from afar, which is order, then you get closer, and that's then things start going off in a different direction.
One of my favorite reviews I think I ever got, because it was so wrong, was of a piece from a long time ago that was actually called Airplane Family Tree. And it partially was born out of the fact that I discovered on the NASA website, they had a ton of high-res, amazing imagery of all of these different kinds of aeronautical aircraft, but other things too. And you could just download them for free. They were publicly accessible. So I made this enormous chart where airplanes meet other airplanes and they give, birth to other airplanes. And then there's like someone marries a blimp and then there are blimp children, and it moves around all over the place, but similarly sort of presented as a very factual looking structure. And this one reviewer wrote, I learned a great deal about aviation history looking at Katchadourian's work. And it's like, the whole thing it's a total fantasy. I mean, you really have so not seen what's going on, but I really cherish that one as sort of it worked maybe too well. But I wanted to ask both of you a question, if I might usurp Mark's role for a second. Is that okay? And go into interviewer mode.
I'm going to say, before you go, I wanted to invite our audience, because I'm terribly remiss and I didn't in my role as the voice of the BBC, or not, whatever, to ask questions. It's in the Q&A chat button at the bottom. Ask whatever you want within reason, I guess. Nina.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, this has been a grim couple years, really grim. And I mean, I found myself too, like putting up this show this time, I don't know, thinking about some of the, especially in this piece, thinking about some of the decisions about people who appear in that piece. I mean, just as an aside, there's been this interesting situation where 4 people have been taken off common food product packaging: the Aunt Jemima, Uncle Ben, the Land of Lakes Indian, Maiden, and the Cream of Wheat Chef, because they are these racist stereotypes that the companies finally were getting a lot of pressure to acknowledge and kind of do something about. So for me, in a way, with this piece, that is the moment where I'm trying to like close the door behind you and point something out about, I think, a really important moment in culture and in thinking right now about these questions. But I mean, I'm thinking also about grimmer forms of humor, kind of moments where there might be an argument even for really aggressive kinds of humor. And I mean, Glenda, I was thinking about the way you end your book actually with a sort of, I mean, the last sentence is, there are all kinds of humor that we need and that we can have, but we also need a laughter that's fit to kill, is your phrase. And I wondered if you could just say a little bit to people about, I know there's a bigger context for that sentence in your book, but I would love to think about that a bit with both of you.
Yeah. I think, we were talking about how humor in general, allows you to experience a kind of, you question the forms and the structures we live by. And when those structures are, killing machines, when they are, absurd, again, I think it's people, when you're talking about killing and being killed, you need a humor that has that kind of a sharpness that can go one up, and shed light on why the killing is happening. It has to kind of, the cover of my book has Richard Pryor with, he's like, he has a bow and arrow, you know, and so it's, you know, it has to hit the mark, you know, so because part of, as we know, timing is everything in humor, right? So like a laughter fit to kill would be the kind of humor that hits the bullseye, right? And that's sharp enough. It has the skill to hit exactly where a lot of enlightenment might happen, you know, to go back to what Reggie was saying earlier.
I was wondering about this idea of humor and politics, you know, of the left and the right. We're always told that humor should shoot up and not down. I'm just wondering what, you know, is humor necessarily of the left or the liberatory, you know, like.
I personally think like I don't know any conservative comedians personally. I don't think that the conservatism is particularly joyful or expansive. You know, the purpose of conservatism, at least to me, is just more of a practical function of like, you know, making things work on a very essential level without a lot of like extra stuff. So it's like the mindset of like, well, we need to put up this solar array, you know, like how are we going to do that? You know, there's not like, humor is not necessary. It helps the job, but it's not necessary. It's just like, it's just, let's get this thing going. So you know, that's why, you know, when you watch Fox News or, you know, I'll watch, you know, videos from Fox News or some other conservative outlet, there's never any joy. People are so like, they look like eagles, you know, it's like, it's always like, yes, everything's really important and I'm very concerned about stuff. And it's really kind of strange that people would resign themselves to just that one mode, because we're obviously very complex beings, and each person is a confluence of conservative and liberal elements. So it's only like in modern times that we have to like choose a team, you know, like it's not really that. But because of that split, that hard split, you just get a lot of kind of joyless, overly concerned, serious, outraged. In that state of mind, there's no way you're gonna be able to access any form of humor, because I would be, I mean, someone would have to be an incredible genius, but even in that context, I just don't think it's possible, because to have humor, you have to have an expansive, zoomed out perspective on something, and to make fun of it in the first place. Otherwise, you're just in a singular, you're not in a binary, because you need the binary awareness to create. You need wiggle room. It's like taking apart a knot. It's like you need a little bit of wiggle room to start to undo it, you know, and when you're just singular, there's nothing to reference to undo from, you know. So I personally think it's kind of interesting that you don't really get the world's funniest conservative comedian. We're up next on Comedy Central. Check out their special. It's like, it's not going to happen, because even if it were true, it would be a joke.
What would you do though about that horrible Trump moment where he made fun of that disabled journalist, which I think a lot of people did think was funny. I mean, I didn't, but you know, I was just thinking a lot during the Trump time about his. I mean, I'd never found the guy funny, but I think some people did. You know, I don't know. I don't know what to do with sort of his mean-spirited kind of sense of humor, which I often found mean-spirited. Maybe that's just you know, maybe that just shows my own political beliefs. Maybe others didn't find it that way. I don't know. I don't. Well, it's like
I'll give you an example that, you know, I don't share it to like ask for anything, right? But when I came to the States, I was 12. I came from Guatemala. I didn't speak any English, and I went to live in Westchester, New York. That's a long story, but I went to an all-white school, and one guy at high school, middle school, called me Taco Bell because he thought it was funny that I, you know, putting like the origin, and a lot of people thought it was funny. You know, that was my nickname, and you know, I think there is a way in which you can, there is conservative humor, and you can see it also in the whole long history of minstrelsy, you know, which is, it's like so influential in the way that like TV and Hollywood has been made, you know. And so I think racial stereotypes and gender stereotypes are actually a source of great humor for some people, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're talking about like Trump in that moment that you're talking about. There's nothing, it's not really funny it's just it's disparaging someone who's defenseless. So in
Mm.
that particular context, it's not by, it's people are laughing because they're like, oh, here's a scapegoat, you know, for my insecurities and how little I think of myself. So,
Right.
you know, and so I don't think Trump was ever, I don't think he even thought he was funny necessarily.
Mm.
I think he does an impression of what he thinks is funny, like
Right.
his behavior. He's like,
Yeah.
I think I'm being funny now, but he
Mm.
doesn't really know what
Mm.
funny is. And all he can do is just disparage someone or make fun of someone, which is the lowest form of, you know, I guess an attempt at humor. That's the best, that's the most generous way of describing it, because real humor is, you know, it's hard to make fun of something unless you love it, you know, I mean, in my experience, you know,
Right. Right.
because you have to kind of understand it, even if it's like annoying to you and it niggles at you or whatever, you have to have a playful way of looking at it in order to make fun of it in the first place.
I
So,
think about that every
doesn't
time you
count.
do the kind of, you're kind of like the soul guy singer. That feels to
Mhm.
me like that kind of homage kind of humor, which is, it's sort of a parody at the same time as it's deeply understanding something. And,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Well, you know, my greatest, my funnest achievement was doing a parody of Radiohead. Because you know, people like, all my friends, like everyone just loves Radiohead. Oh my God, genius, brilliant Radiohead. And it was like at like a real heightened time for Radiohead. And when I did my special at Central Park, Alive at Central Park, I did an impression, and I called the song Sorry Tom York. And I basically just did like a complete like refabrication of all the tropes that they use, because it was very simple to do. And I mean, from like a musically minded, I guess, I don't know,
Yeah.
for me it just seemed like very obvious what the formula
Yeah.
was. So I just did it, and I love that people were like, oh, what, like they were, and I was like, and
You're punching down.
I know you're punching down or whatever, but it's like, no, you have to understand what and that's why I picked Radiohead, because Radiohead is such a sacred thing, and yeah, I'm making fun of it, but I also appreciate, you know, Radiohead as well as a musician. So it's kind of fun to like understand something, but also kind of deconstruct it in a silly way.
But sometimes you can love something in a kind of backwards, weird, twisted way, you know. Like a great book on mystery is called Love and Theft. And it's about how people love Black culture and steal it from it too, you know. And this love that's kind of, you know, so, you know, going back to your point about loving it, you know, you love it, but you're threatened by it, you know, so you make fun of it to put it down, right?
Yeah.
I taught this course last fall that Glenda visited, and it's a course on humor and visual art. But I had a couple of artist friends, my friends Ben and Jesse, came and visited because they've been doing a project for a couple of years collecting insult humor from around the world. It's a great project, and part of what they point out through this is that you have to really know someone to insult them well. And in some ways, like a really good insult is like, I'm really being seen. I mean, this person really gets me, to kind of have summed me up through this kind of other route in this way. And I thought a lot about that, like, you know, to be teased in a way that is the best kind of teasing is actually something that understands like your essence. Someone shows you, they get that, they get something about that.
And it is a kind of popular, there's a kind of folk form to it, isn't there? Like I you know, somebody introduced me to this idea of joning. I'm not that generation, but I get it deep within me, you know, like from watching Python to listening to Julie. I've understood that if you occupy those positions of power, like, you know, Michael Palin pretending to be this English professor that he's satirizing Eton and satirizing power, that actually the shell that you occupy, you can then speak through somehow, which I think is super interesting. But I think, insult culture, it's an odd one, isn't it? It does bring it together. It's like a toughening up of a tribe or a little group. You know, I remember
it
being
can skirt that,
empowered.
yeah, and it can skirt that very interesting line, which I think is present in any situation involving humor, which is how close are you going to get to crossing to the bad side?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. It's sort of, you know, there's a way in which it sifts out, like who are you? Who are you vis-a-vis me? Are you with me or against me? Like there's so much of that goes on in every, you know, I can think of so many moments in life where someone tells a joke and there's kind of this like, are you going to laugh or are you not going to laugh? Because what you do next is going to say a whole ton about you and like bond you or alienate you or determine your politics or demonstrate this or that. It's such a kind of quick and telling thing. And I guess to go back to maybe an earlier theme we kind of kicked around a bit, but to me, that's the thing that humor and beauty have always had in common, is that you sometimes react to it before you've been able to intellectualize the reaction. It's kind of like it's already happened to you. And sometimes there can be this terrible feeling of, my God, I really shouldn't have laughed, or I wish I hadn't found that beautiful, or whatever it is. You're sort of disarmed, you know?
And I think maybe I could ask a question, and not to be, let's throw some contention into this, just as our last point. As we're discussing humor, and a few people have kind of touched upon this in their questions, but to paraphrase, is that line changing now? You know, we've talked about the conservative and the uptight and the policing of a culture. That seems to have switched somewhat. The kind of left and right politics has changed. And I hear a lot about, and I don't know necessarily what to think about it, but the policing of humor, the policing of content, the policing of subject is with us again. Is it the time to back off the contentious subject? Or is it the time to take it head on and to engage with the social message and to, in fear of being on the wrong side of history? You know?
That's such a good question. I struggle with this in this humor class. Every semester I teach it because, you know, initially, the first time I taught it, my fear was that like we were going to be in this kind of gray zone and people could get hurt, and there could be this kind of like no one really knew how to sort of respectfully deal with the question. But in fact, the problem has sort of been the opposite, that all the students are so concerned with being so good and so careful and so respectful that we actually can't go very near what I think is a very important aspect of the whole thing, as we've been saying, which is that kind of difficult, interesting gray zone line, like where you kind of skirt up to something which shows you the kind of incredible set of contradictions and paradoxes and problematic things that we've lived with all the time within us. That's hard to talk about. And it certainly in a classroom, it takes a lot of trust also among the students and the teacher and everybody to kind of build a space where it's okay to talk about those things. But we are in a moment, I agree with you, Mark, of kind of extreme self-scrutiny. Yeah. And I mean, I showed them, I think, you know, Reggie, it's funny you brought up Andy Kaufman earlier, but I showed them that Andy Kaufman film where, you know, the wrestling match one. Yes. And they were freaked out by this film. And it was sort of really difficult to discuss it because there were so many things wrong to begin with. And I had a hard time getting past the kind of, you know, you kind of want to say, there's a lot wrong here, but there's also a lot of really interesting things happening here. Can we also talk about that? Right. It's tough.
Well, I mean, that's a great example. I think, you know, hearing all of that, and there's definitely like a lot of self-awareness and self-analysis, like where, like, can I say this? Should I say it like this? What if it's, you know, like before I even post something, I have to like approach it from 360 degrees and kind of run it off of like fragmented versions of myself representing different points of view. It's like, it's kind of crazy. But the one thing that definitely helps with that, and this Andy Kaufman piece is a great example. If it's done with love, it's fine. You know what I mean? Like because even if it's challenging, the right people will understand it. Other people will take it immediately for face value and just go, "That's wrong. You can't talk about that." It's like, wait a minute, before you know, indict this person, like really check it out, you know, because it's really just challenging the idea. The thing that you think that the thing that you think that's wrong about it, it's actually commenting, it's actually opening it up in a way that's more useful than just being against it. You know what I mean? Like, and I find that for me, like, you know, if I hear, any comedian or any satirist kind of approach these ideas. Nowadays, people are like, but there is, and then there's going too far, right? There's like being a little bit too aggressive and too like, I don't really care about this. But when it's done like in this kind of instinctual way that like Kaufman did, that whole wrestling thing, when I saw it, I was like, oh, I see what he's doing. It's like, he's not like that at all. Like he's actually promoting something. He's attacking something and he's having people participate in a situationist way. That's why I kind of ascribe to, I think what saves us these days is a situationist style of interacting with the world, where you know, the way I condense it is like, you know, provoke to the edge of violence. And there's a certain amount of art that needs to do that. We need to, like, that's what punk rock was. It's like punk was like, looked violent, felt violent. Sometimes it got violent, but for the most part, a mosh pit was actually a joyous place where people would kind of look out for each other, and they were just kind of letting out all that energy, and they were protective of the culture. So, you know, they were protective, but it was joyful and through its angst, you know. And so for me, I think situationist point of view, that's why I love confusion, destabilization, because it disarms people immediately to their essence, hopefully. I mean, that's being generous, but
it is, like the punk and the culture of the mosh pit was actually picking people up. I remember it was a clear line. That was you fell down, you get picked up. And I think humor, it does have that. And maybe one last question. We have 5 minutes.
Wait, can I butt in? Because I really want to hear how Glenda deals with this classroom setting around these things.
Yeah.
If you wouldn't mind.
We can workshop the modern pedagogy of doing the right thing. I'd love to do that as well. I would love to do that. Yeah. Glenda, how do you approach it?
I lost you for a second. In terms of song. Can you repeat it?
I was just thinking about the kind of interesting difficulty pedagogically sometimes of teaching humor, and where students are afraid of that sort of tricky space, how to speak to these things.
Teaching. I taught a class on Black humor at Harvard a few times, and it was also very difficult. Part of it, I think, just stepping off for a second from the difficulties of the political moment, I think people don't like to analyze humor because they think they just want to enjoy it, you know. So I had a hard time allowing them to think there's a different kind of pleasure when you look to see how humor happens, right? So there's the visceral experience, and then there's the more analytical one. And when you join them, it's really there's this very lovely thing that happens, right? Very eye-opening too. I think, you know, at times it's the feeling of that it's so live, you know. There was one of the times that I taught Black humor, one of the lectures that I gave, I was quoting a joke from, you know, the antebellum period, where that could be read very different ways, right? Like an enslaved person is caught eating the master's pig, and the master says to the slave, you know, catches the slave, and the slave says, you sure got less pig now, but you got, wait, I might butcher the line. You got less, you know, basically the joke was like, I ate property and I'm property, so you got more nigger, right? You got less pig now, but you got more, right? I was quoting the joke, and then a student repeated it, and of course the N-word is in there, right? And so the student said it back, and then the N-word was live in the room, and it was coming from a white person, you know. And so there was this like kissing of teeth and moving, you know, of heads. And then it was like that moment where you're like, okay, this is what happens. This is live. We have to talk about what just happened, you know? And so if you can make it a kind of teaching moment, as you know, then they can see that the necessity of going where it's difficult.
That's great. Yeah. I think I've seen my favorite question in the Q&A, which is so funny to me that I have to read it out loud. Yeah. Nina, are you related to Harry and Alice Katchadourian? They were rug dealers. If you can answer me later, that would be appreciated, not being funny. So I'm not related to the rug dealers, but my father, who is hearing this Zoom and collects rugs, would be thrilled at the thought that I am related to these rug dealers. But maybe I'll also sort of share an Armenian joke. People keep asking for us to tell jokes, and I'll tell one that I think is like perhaps a summation of many things we've touched on. But so my grandmother, who was a genocide survivor, was moved from Lebanon to suburban California, and lived out her days there. And in her garden, she was growing little pots of herbs and had a bunch of parsley. And she was an amazing cook, so she was constantly sort of using these things. And so my dad had been over there one day, and she had said to him, "Could you go and cut a bit of parsley from the garden?" And he had come in with some like paltry amount of parsley, and she said, "What are you doing? Like, go cut a whole bunch more." So he went out and chopped away at this plant, and she comes back with more, and she sends him out one more time, and she says, "You have to cut it within an inch of its life. Parsley is like Armenians. The more you try to kill them, the better they grow." And it was like, oh my God. I mean, that sort of survivor humor, grimness that I think she made that up on the spot. I don't think that was like a sort of inherited joke, but yeah. So sometimes that's how you meet it.
I mean, addressing our subtitle, I think for an audience, I think we should give them some wellness strategies, and not to be too glib about it, but maybe our last question is, we are in this odd, strange, weird moment that we're hopefully just like a chrysalis we're about to come out of. I wondered for each of you, what's getting you through? It might be humor, it might not be. But I just wondered, I think in the first month of lockdown, for me, I was online watching a lot of stand-up comedy moments, which were weirdly affecting because everybody was in the front row, and this attempt to connect or to socialize kind of somewhat got me through, and certainly stand-up has, and certainly comic writing has. I wondered for each of you, strategies for survival. Reggie.
Strategy for survival. Well, keep eating, exercise. No, I think, yeah. So, well, I mean, I think just zooming out as much as you can, and sometimes zooming out is zooming in too, in physics or in science, what's great about our exploration, our explorative kind of mindset is that we invent these telescopes to see further and further into the universe, and we have these theories about what we're going to find, and then what we find generally is a lot of grayness, like blurriness, like the universe on the grand scale starts to turn to mush, and then you look the other way and you go into the quantum realm and it becomes mush again. So we're kind of like sandwiched between mush, so yeah. We have like an observable experience, but like in actuality, nothing is really certain. So in that context, that's either going to induce some kind of existential crisis about who you are and what is reality. But for me, like zooming out and zooming in and being aware of those two things really creates a sense of wonder, and also takes you away from like, well, yeah, people are being assholes right now. There's like a lot of like terrible things, but also, that's all we're getting exposed to. It's just like this huge feedback loop. But then when you look at statistics, it's like, well, it's actually the most peaceful time that human society has been in. So it's just like basically just to give context to things. Like when I see someone being mean, there's equally someone being really joyful and loving to someone. When there's people trying to exterminate some people, there are other people that are propagating and fighting for the rights of others by being kind. So for me, it's just keeping that context in mind.
For me, it's a little bit more banal. It's what's in New York. It's this Instagram site, and it gives you like videos of what people are doing to survive in New York, right? So like you see people in like rooftops exercising and like doing like sword fighting, or like you see like really nutty things that happen in New York, like it's people like I don't know, doing like a tightrope between buildings, like really nutty things, especially during the hard lockdown. It was great to see how people experience like the constriction of space and the kind of almost insane things that people were doing, you know, and so that, and it's also, I mean, this is actually kind of in reference to some of the questions we've been getting about like online humor, you know, like memes and also, you know, sort of TikTok, you know, and there've been, you know, some really amazing artists who've done a lot of stuff with the humor of being alone inside, you know, and how to kind of the emotional breakdown of being under fear of death, you know, and all of these things that we've been experiencing. And by seeing people kind of create something humorous with it, it like gives me a momentary lift, you know, like, so when I feel like I'm really going dark, you know, I see a quick video and I'm reminded to keep light on my feet, you know.
Lightness, that's good.
I think there's an argument to be made that I sometimes kind of lose. I forget how important this is for me anyway, where I think if you're someone who sort of makes creative work, or people expect this is sort of the thing you do, there's a lot of, I'll tell the story this way. At the beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of, a question came my way a lot, which was, you know, oh, you know, the pandemic must be great for artists. You know, you must be having this like great time in the pandemic. It's like, no, it's terrible. This is terrible. It's not easy to make things right now, actually. It's really stressful. And I decided to sort of think about the term art making in two halves. And I decided I didn't care about the art right now. I wasn't going to worry about the art, but I really did care about the making. And I was just going to make things that felt good to make. Really, that was the criteria. I'm going to make stuff that I just can get lost in and kind of get my hands into. And I spent a month making a giant cardboard cactus out of a bunch of old mailing boxes and 600 toothpicks. And I really worked hard on this thing. It was very distracting and very absorbing, and it kept me moving forward. It kept me sort of feeling like, you know, there was a joy in doing this. I guess that's what I want to talk about, is the sort of joy in making things. And I think sometimes there's this weird pressure that I don't believe everything artists make is art. I don't think that's true. I make a lot of things just because they're really fun to make, and because I want to give them to my friends as gifts, or because they make me happy to make. And I think worrying less about these categories was really important for me to think about. And eventually I got back to making exhibitable art that, and it was kind of a useful stretch of pandemic time and so on. But I'm sort of trying to kind of loosen up for myself a bit, this category of, you know, when is it art? When is it stuff? Just do the thing that you're inclined to do. That really helps me. And worry later about what to call it, or worry later about why you're doing it. Just do it for now.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Nike was right.
Yes. Was right. And I'd like to thank you all for speaking to that topic. I'd like to again invite all of our audience to come through Chelsea and to experience Cumulus and Nina's work firsthand, and to question the genealogy. Thanks again to our guest, Reggie. It's great to check in with you again remotely over distance. And Glenda, I can't wait till I get to Venice again. So this is me in Park Slope saying goodbye, and thanks to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you, brilliant people.
Thank you so much for being here.